We've got 3 speakers today. We've got all of whom are working on projects which are at different levels of completion. So we thought the best way to take things forward or to demonstrate what's going on would be to start with the most completed project, then we'll go to the one that's halfway through, and then we'll go to the project which is quite new and looking for ways to grow, I think. So I'd like to hand over first of all to Lisa Tressida, who is from Kensa Heat Pumps, and they've got a couple of really interesting street decarbonisation projects almost complete. So we'd love to share them with you. Over to you, Lisa.
Morning, everybody. Now, my presentation is going to be quite high level for the topic. So just do bear in mind it's perfectly okay to be asking questions, and I'll try and answer what I can. My name is Lisa Tressida. I'm Director of Business Development in Kensa Utilities, which is part of the Kensa Group. The Kensa Group is made up of Kensa Heat Pumps, which is a Cornish manufacturer of heat pumps, Kensa Contracting, which does design, installation and commissioning of heat pump systems, and Kensa Utilities, which was set up to fund, own and maintain ground array infrastructure serving heat pumps. Kensa's been doing fantastically well in the last few years. We were invested in by Legal & General back in 2020, and we announced this week further investment from both Legal & General and Octopus Energy of £70 million, which is believed to be the largest investment ever in the UK in heating, ground source heat pumps. Now, why do we need that? Well, the scale of the challenge of achieving net zero is absolutely immense. The carbon associated with heating our homes is the biggest challenge that we need to overcome to achieve net zero in the UK. And it takes an awful lot to change people's behaviour and to change the infrastructure that provides us with heating. We're all really comfortable having gas central heating systems. We're familiar with it. Britain's really good at it. 85% of the homes in the UK are heated with gas, and we install 1.7 million gas boilers every year. So it's a massive industry that we've got really good at, and gas is cheap. Gas boilers are cheap, and so we're comfortable with it. And this is, so we're quite often told that we should be doing fabric first. Well, if the question is net zero, then the answer is heat pumps. The single biggest thing that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint in relation to heating your home is to change the fuel that you use to heat your house. The graph here shows the blue bar is the amount of carbon associated with heating a home that hasn't got particularly great insulation. The yellow bar is how much carbon is associated in heating that home when you do some basic insulation. So that's loft, cavity wall, draft proofing, those kind of measures. If you do no insulation but install a heat pump, you're almost at net zero then. So this is the carbon that we would expect that house to produce related to heating in round about 2030 as the grid decarbonises without doing any insulation measures, just installing a heat pump. But how are we getting on? Well, the UK is currently installing heat pumps at round about 50,000 per year. I saw it estimated that our current rate of installations will probably reach net zero in 600 years at this rate. We in Kensa are pretty sure that we can do better than that. And we're trying to come up with ways that makes it easier for people to take up heat pumps and decarbonise their homes. So what we're doing is looking at how do we heat our homes today? Everyone's really comfortable with the gas grid. There's networks of pipes under the ground, a little white box in each house, and people pay monthly bills for the fuel that they use and for the standing charge to use that infrastructure. What Kensa wants to see is the same thing, but with a low carbon equivalent. So we want pipes in the ground connected to every property. Everyone owns a little white box. Kensa Utilities owns the infrastructure asset in the road, and we charge a standing charge for that. The householder runs the heat pump in their house using electricity that is metered, and they're billed for that. So it's a really familiar setup to people. This is not complex. There's not a big unit outside their house. There is no street in the UK that you wouldn't be able to install boreholes in that we're aware of yet. This would work. So we started Heat the Streets, which is demonstration of this vision for the future, where instead of people having to invest in the incredibly expensive infrastructure that serves the heat pump, we would install it with a split ownership system. So we install the infrastructure asset and people own a heat pump in their house. Heat the Streets was a 24-month project, part funded by the ERDF. We'll be receiving around about £3.6 million from ERDF by the time we finish this project. And the rest of the finance for this is coming from kensa. So what we're doing is the split ownership system. We own all these pipes in the ground. We have 20-year contracts with the people that are using the heat from that network. And we've worked across 3 sectors. The one I'm going to focus on today is the retrofit project, but we're charging each of these market sectors a monthly standing charge, which is fixed. It can only go up with inflation. We can't add a whole load of additional fees to that. We actually capped the inflation as well, because that was looking like quite a significant threat to people a few months ago. So it's a very straightforward contract that protects the people that are connected to the network. So what this is not, which is also quite important, is a high temperature district heat network where people are exposed to big fluctuations in the energy costs and billing. So our aim was to reduce carbon emissions related to heating, but also to demonstrate replicability. So we can show this could be rolled out anywhere. What we're not doing is a project that relies on some really specific local features that couldn't be done easily elsewhere. We're trying to develop an evidence base that's going to allow us to roll this out across the rest of the UK. And ideally, we would actually want other people to be copying this idea. So we're talking about it quite a lot. And the benefit of that to a business like kensa is that the more people that are doing this kind of thing, the more trust people are going to start seeing in the solution. And now another point is what this project is a demonstration of what is possible today. We're not trying to do anything particularly fancy. We're using existing technology. We're just changing the ownership model of that, and that allows us to open up a new business model and reduce the barrier of the upfront cost of ground source heating for people. It's tangible, so it's not some theoretical idea. It's not perfect, and it's not particularly complex. We've picked our battles and we've focused on that so that we can actually achieve something that's useful at the end of the project, not try to fix all of the problems all in one go and stumble. Now that's not to say that this isn't a difficult project, but we've been careful to try not to overstretch ourselves, and it's definitely worth remembering when you enter into your own project. Don't try to solve all of the problems all at once. Pick the ones that you think you can actually overcome if you're doing a demonstration project, and work hard at those. We had to do a lot of community engagement for retrofit, because you have to bring the community along with you, whether or not they're actually receiving a heat pump. You want them on your side so that they're not blocking progress of the project. And the way that we went about this was a basic sales funnel approach. So you build general awareness. you create interest in the local community, and then you get that local community on board to fight your battles for you. So the quotes that you can see on screen now are some of the feedback that we've actually had from residents about how valuable the community events were, where they got to speak, where they got to hear the questions and answers that their neighbours were asking, because it might be questions that they hadn't thought of yet. And how important the direct communication was to them. We also had a dedicated resident liaison officer that offered one-to-one support and aftercare, and she's still doing that right now. The level of interest we had was amazing. So the map that you can see here is the number of registrations in the village for taking part in the project. We had about 280 people express an interest. We then narrowed down to the areas that had the most dense clusters of interested people, and we focused on those. So the area up here is where Hendra Close is. This was the first bit of private retrofit that we did. We had almost 80% uptake here, which was, you know, really quite something. And it's worth doing a similar thing, focusing in on the areas that have the most interest, because you're going to have less of a battle to get people to agree with what you're planning in their area. And this here is a short video of some of the work that we did in the highway. Now, we didn't actually install the infrastructure in the road for every single property that was connected to this, because that would have taken us too much time. We had to go through planning applications, we had to go through Section 50 license applications to work in the highway. It's a very complex and expensive process. And what we wanted to do was to demonstrate that it was possible. So only about a third of the retrofit installations that we're doing are going to be connected to infrastructure that's in the highway. The rest of them are connected to infrastructure that's actually in their own garden. Now, the business model is the same, and we have demonstrated that we can work in the highway. So we have achieved what we set out to do here. You can see from the drawing on the right-hand side of this, the green properties are properties that are receiving a heat pump during the project. We've also put in connection points for the other properties in this area to join at a later date when their current heating system breaks. And that's actually one of the more exciting things, believe it or not, about this project, is the ones that we don't do, because now we get to sit back and watch and find out how long does it take people to connect to this network? What's the level of interest, the appetite for it? And then what are the processes that we have to go through internally to help that happen? The planning process for this project, I thought, was fairly slow and difficult. It took us, I think, 4 or 5 months to get planning permission. I've since been told that that's incredibly fast compared to a lot of other projects. But I have to say it wasn't without issues. We did have planning conditions put on us. So the highways team were concerned that our equipment under the road collecting heat was going to freeze the surface of the highway and cause health and safety issues. It's not an entirely silly idea, because we are extracting heat from the ground, but the truth of the matter is that if we'd installed this infrastructure about 3 meters to the side, it would have been considered permitted development and we wouldn't have to go through planning at all. So this is where it helps us that this technology has been used before. It's evidence that this is okay. You know, Kensa's done, I think, 12,000 installations like this, and the only difference to this particular part of the project is the location of that technology. That's the only thing that's different to business as usual. the outcomes of our project. So we've now got 6 weeks to go on this project. It's grant funded, and we're limited in time because of that, the availability of that grant funding. At the end of the project, we will have installed 100 heat pumps across 5 sites in Cornwall. Those properties will see an immediate 70% reduction in their carbon emissions, and that will continue to go down as our grid decarbonises. That work that we've done in the road, installing boreholes and the shared ground array, is a world first. Other people have installed the trenching to serve properties, but not the boreholes in the highway. And that is quite a complex thing to be doing. And it's definitely incredibly expensive. So that's why it's really helped us that we've had the grant funding available to try that. We've also made kensa Utilities an operational utility company doing this. So we've developed the suite of legal agreements that we needed. We've set up all of the customer accounts, and we're registering these sites with the Heat Trust, which is a voluntary way to show that that there is security for the people that are connecting to this. We've had some really positive feedback from our residents and incredibly high profile media coverage for what has been a very small Cornish company. So we've been on the local BBC twice. We've had ITV down. We had an article in the Financial Times. So it's been a very high profile and valuable project for kensa. However, there are some limitations. So we've not quite managed to do everything that we want with this project, and that's helping us to understand what we should be doing next. So we've got a reputation through this of having a solution for decarbonising rural areas because we're demonstrating it in a rural area. We've not demonstrated that there's a willingness to pay from our customers because all of the private retrofit received the heat pump with no upfront cost. And we had to do that because of our time limitations, but then we're missing out on the learning as to what would people pay towards this. And, you know, can we get people to pay enough that we can do this without subsidy in future? We've also experienced very high capital costs, and that I think is partly to do with our grant funding. When you tell people that you've got a grant funded project, they think there's a lot of free money. We've also been limited to the time frame that we can deliver these works in, and so therefore some of our contractors have been able to kind of hold us to ransom with costs. The time restriction and the limited local supply chain that we're particularly affected by being on a peninsula has meant that we've had to limit the scale of the project. We were about to get into contracts for an additional 100 homes to be part of this project. So the total number of heat pumps installed would have been 200, but we had to back out of that because we don't have enough installers to work all at the same time, and we weren't able to extend the duration of the project. The other issue that we've got is this is an off-gas village that we've focused on for retrofit. So we're not quite demonstrating how this business model stands up against gas as the counterfactual. So that's led to a whole raft of things that we want to look at next. So how do we get this solution to the next level? How do we get it closer to market readiness now? We need to reduce the costs. So we're working with a company to try and bring down the cost of the drilling to the cost of installing the infrastructure. kensa Heat Pumps is looking at more efficient heat pumps and heat pumps that have built-in energy storage to help people manage the cost. kensa's lobbying government for the changes that we think are necessary to speed up deployment based on what we've learned on this project. We're working to reduce the cost of finance, and one of the ways we're doing that is in investment, such as we've got through Octopus. And then we've got more work to do on the market analysis. So Kensa's focus has been on the markets of new builds and social housing retrofit. And we went in to heat the streets thinking that the market would work in a very similar way. And it doesn't. It's incredibly different. And if we're actually to break into a solution that's going to allow us to decarbonize street by street, we need to really analyze that market and to work out how best to work in that market, and what assumptions do we need to change. So one of the things that we're looking at is on high temperature heat pumps. Is that a solution that would be useful, where people wouldn't have to take out all of the radiators in their house, and they might be able to just run a heat pump at a higher temperature and accept a lower efficiency in that system and slightly higher running costs.
Lisa, this is really interesting, and I'm conscious we're going over time.
That's me done. So good time.
Great. There are lots and lots of questions in the chat box, many of which might be, you could probably just answer with just 1 or 2 lines. And then and while that's going on, I suggest we go to our next speaker. And then I think in our Q&A, we will probably, it looks like it would be good to have some conversations about costs and financial viabilities and the things that you wrapped up in your final slide. So, but thank you. That was a really interesting presentation. I hope others found it interesting and inspiring. Yeah, we've got a couple of thumbs up there. So I'm going to hand over now to Jonathan from Carbon Co-op. We're going from talking about not fabric first to fabric first, I think, with Jonathan.
Yeah. Happy to have a conversation about that.
Lively.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's interesting. Okay, so yeah, my name's Jonathan. I'm the retrofit lead and one of the co-founders here at Carbon Co-op, and we're a community energy organisation based in Manchester, and we style ourselves as a energy services cooperative because what we do kind of crosses lots of different things. So we've been in operation for over 10 years now, and just a really brief introduction to the work we do. We're about 17, 18 members of staff now. Our turnover is about £1 million. We do a range of different projects, innovation projects, delivery projects, all sorts of things. Over the years, we've done a lot of retrofit, and we've done quite technical retrofit kind of services. We've developed like an assessment service based on SAP to assess properties, for example. We've also delivered a big scheme, a £300,000 deep retrofit scheme across numerous different properties. We also do a lot of work sharing information, awareness, kind of brokering information between people. That's part of our kind of ethos as a community energy organisation. We have a membership of 400, so we've got a lot of people involved to kind of learn from it, and we're supporting them on their decarbonisation journey. We've also spun off a retrofit one-stop shop called People Powered Retrofit, which is a one-stop shop for retrofit and operates in the Northwest as well. What I'm going to talk about today is an area-based approach to retrofit. I'd like to typify and compare and contrast that to like a one-stop shop, one that is kind of bespoke. Firstly, though, just a bit of kind of background. So specifically talking about area-based schemes. So this is essentially the creation of a retrofit offer, a standardized offer that is available to anyone who lives within a certain area. And that area can be defined in different scales. It could be a street, as is the focus for today. It could be wider, it could be the area of a city, a town, a village, what have you. Some of the conceptual basis for this comes from like a number of different sources. And indeed, like local authorities used to do a lot of area-based schemes. They didn't call them retrofit. They were often about improvement to housing, improvement to like an area in terms of new roofs or windows or what have you, often where there's a lot of social housing. In 2010, an organisation we work closely with called URBED developed this report called Community Green Deal. It preceded the Green Deal, which was so badly received across the UK. So unfortunately, the name's slightly tainted. But this posited the idea of a community-led intermediary. You can see that delivery body in the middle on the right-hand side that would sit between many different householders, aggregate householders, householder demand, and other key stakeholders, such as the supply chain, such as investors, such as local authorities. And it's this idea of a community intermediary that offers a standardized approach to retrofit within an area, which is the one that we've developed in our current project. This is the slide I was talking about when I was typifying between different kind of approaches, the one-stop shop and the area-based, and to try and give you an idea of how they differ. The one-stop shop, basically, it's delivering a retrofit service anywhere. It's very bespoke. It's to individual householders. Householders themselves are procuring contractors, although some one-stop shops may offer the contracting. It's about able to pay and self-funded people, owner-occupiers. It's like a single provider that's offering that service to one-stop shop. And yeah, the householder contracts the labour, the contractor. In an area-based approach, that's very individualised, that's very kind of unique. Area-based is basically generalised and collective. It's an area offer for a specific location, a standardised retrofit offer, and we can talk about what a standardised offer might look like. It's procured centrally by this community intermediary, this organisation. It can benefit from a mixture of funding, so it can also help people that don't have the ability to fund themselves or maybe have some ability but need help. It can be multi-tenure, so it can be private rental, owner-occupier, and even social housing as well mixed in. It benefits from a partnership approach because that intermediary can act as a nexus for all different types of stakeholders, and it will benefit from a group works contract. So I'll come on to explain a bit about that, but it's not a single contracting householder and the contractor, the intermediary is involved in that. So why would we even do that? Yeah, you know, some of the reasons we would do that. It's a new model, well, it's repurposing an old model, a council-based model, but it's a new approach to retrofit at a time when we need to hugely scale retrofit delivery across the UK, and scale and speed are a real benefit here. Rather than working with one at a time, one householder at a time, going through a whole design process, it taking a while, we can work across the board, offer a single kind of offer to many different people. You can be more diverse, it can reach more different people, different kind of levels of engagement, involvement and money. It can benefit from social marketing. That's like a bottom-up approach based on community champions and word of mouth. It can be collaborative. It can be purpose, so that you can have training elements, apprenticeships and all that sort of thing. And you can build long-term relationships with contractors, and contractors we know is a real barrier to scaling of retrofit. It can be cheaper, but I want to slightly kind of maybe like prick that bubble, because a lot of people say, oh, bulk procurement will definitely be cheaper. Actually, bulk procurement creates additional costs around coordination. So it may be cheaper, or there may be aspects that are cheaper, but I wouldn't be a given that bulk procurement equals cheaper. I don't think that runs. Why might you not get involved with this? And we can talk about how appropriate this is for different community energy organisations to get involved. Significantly, there's contractual risk involved. You know, you're acting as a contractor, and then do you have the capacity, the knowledge, the skills, the technical expertise to get involved, or can you work in partnership? So there are questions here. It doesn't fit everyone. It's not one size fits all. It's an approach we advocate. So how does this relate to the actual project that we've actually been doing, now that we understand a bit about the context and why you might do this and where does this come from? Okay, so the project itself, so it's a phased approach to an area base in South Manchester. So it's very, very urban area. And this is phase one of a number of different phases. And this is establishing the area-based scheme. It's fabric first, as Liz mentioned. So we've got EWI, windows, air tightness, controls and ventilation, making the homes heat pump ready. There's definitely an aspect there about heat pumps being part of decarbonisation, but it's super important for us to reduce demand first. Otherwise, the grid will not be able to sustain large heat pump loads and we won't be able to generate the sufficient clean energy we need to generate that energy. The contract itself is for 7 houses in 2 clusters, £250,000 contract, and as I said, more phases to come. And it's very much a partnership approach. We're working very closely with the City Council, and I'll talk about their involvement in a sec. Other community institutions, we have a couple of designers, architects on board, a single contractor that we've procured through a negotiated contract, and of course the householders themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. I am aware of time, so I'm not going to go into too much detail to this. But the stages we went through here is we went through a mapping and area selection process. We didn't say we're going to do it in this area. We looked at a broader area and looked at some of the demographics, some of the house types, and looked in particular for areas where there were similar and common archetypes, similar types of property. And then we built a partnership around the local authority and other partners. NHS are involved in other people. And there's a twin track approach from there on, which matches design with engagement. And you can see on either side, you start wide and you go narrow. So it's an area-based wide assessment of the archetypes and an area-wide engagement with the institutions. Then you're looking at archetype design, you're getting into the detail, and then you've got street selection. So you're like doing these in combination. Then finally, it's house assessment, going house by house, measured surveys and whole house assessments as we offer, and then selecting individual householders for the contract. And as you can see, this means that additional phasing will be like simpler because we've done a lot of the work already. This is a little bit of I've got some screen grabs here, but this is the area you can kind of see. We're focusing on certain streets. As I said, we've done quite a lot of mapping. We looked at energy, archetypes, demographics, fuel poverty, all sorts of things. This is something of the householder journey. I'm obviously not going to go through this, but this kind of shows you the kind of detail that's involved. It is a construction project. We heard from Lisa about planning, planning and other considerations, part of this, building control, all sorts of things. You can see on the left, that's all the processes that we're going through. On the right, we're trying to simplify it for the householders so they're kind of clear about what the stages are. But yeah, this is some of the archetype designs that we've done. This is like the mid level of design. Beyond this is a very detailed assessment and then design process. But this gives you a bit of an indication of the level of design. The funding offer I want to highlight as a key kind of unique thing here. So Carbon Co-op have grant money that we can grant to people in fuel poverty, and that's accumulated from a previous scheme, a lending scheme that we did. Matched with that, we have council lending. This is 0% lending from the council up to £25,000. It goes as a charge on the house. There's no upfront fees, there's no interest, and the money is discharged when the householder sells their house. So it's extremely patient, adaptable capital and great lending. Many councils have this in their arsenal, but have either forgotten about it or don't use it. It works well for them because they have an asset that sits on their balance sheet, which is the charge on the house, rather than just revenue lending. So we're really keen to push this as a replicable model. And then in some cases, there's contributions from the householder. So you can see we're stacking revenue together, and it might, depending on the householder, are they in fuel poverty, are they not? These things can flex up and down. This is a very simple, I'm not going to go into this either. It's a contractual diagram, but at the top, you can see many householders. In the middle, you can see Carbon Co-op. So we're contracting with many householders. We do bear contractual risk, and then we contract a contractor to do the work. To the side, we have technical advisors, architects, and what have you. So where are we at the moment? Just wrapping up now. So right in the middle. So we've selected the householders, we've got the houses, they've done the initial loans kind of outline. We're currently detailed design and planning, so it should go to planning in the next week or so. There is highways implications from EWI and that sort of thing. There'll then be a tender package and a full quote from our partner, B4Box. We've already got an outline quote, or estimate, and works on site happening probably autumn. Hopefully, fingers crossed with that planning. And we're already looking at additional phases and replication elsewhere, because a lot of local authorities are interested in this as a really interesting collaborative approach. Yeah, there's some information there if you want it. Last slide. What are the considerations if you're thinking about this? And as Liz said, I'm really aware that on this call there are people from community and voluntary sector groups who are just starting out to big organisations that employ staff and have been involved in highly technical projects. I think it's really important to think about the composition of that community intermediary. In our case, it's Carbon Co-op. It could be a joint venture or a partnership with a local authority, with a development trust, community-led trust, or other things. So there's ability there to kind of collaborate. What's your risk appetite? Construction is a risky game. You just need to mitigate those risks with appropriate kind of design and insurance and all that sort of thing. So again, you know, if you're just starting out, maybe this isn't for you. If you're more technical and you're interested in stuff, this could be a really big potential kind of approach. What's your technical capacity? What's your track record? Is this something new to you? Have you been involved? If it is new, there may be things you can do stepwise to get involved in this thing with the idea of an area-based scheme at the end of it. I should highlight this scheme's taken 2 years to develop. You know, it's not something that can happen overnight. So it is something to build towards. And yeah, what role could a community energy organisation play here? It could be part of the outreach, part of the advice, could be part of the recruitment, could be part of the household, the hand-holding aspects of it, rather than getting involved in all the technical work. But I would emphasise really, someone does need to get involved in the technical work. Someone does need to take that technical risk. So it's important not to kind of imagine that can go away. Someone needs to put their hand up. Local authorities have been in this role in the past, but they've certainly been burnt from 13 years of austerity, and a lot of that capacity and a lot of that technical skills gone. So yeah, there are options there, community-led housing, all sorts of things to explore. We think it's a really good model. It has a lot of potential, and happy to talk more about it in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'd be really keen to see your outcomes, because it does look like a really interesting model. And I don't know about others. Yeah, it looks like there are questions popping up in the chat box already about this. I had questions, but they've flown through my head and out the other window. So I'll look forward to hearing other people's questions shortly. And before we go into the Q&A, I'd like to open the floor up now to Sarah Burgess, who is working in Hertfordshire and is even more at the beginnings of a project. I think it's more like the outcomes of a feasibility study and future ways forward. So I'll hand over to Sarah now, and I'm really looking forward to the Q&A because there's so many things to ask.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yeah, wow, how do I follow those two? We are literally right at the beginning of our project. So yeah, I'm Sarah Burgess. My colleague John Ingleby is also on the line, so he'll probably step in and speak to a few points. We work for Grand Union Community Energy. And oh, hang on. I told you, Liz, I'd try this and then technology would leave me. So we're known as GUCE for short, just because it's a lot easier. So Grand Union Community Energy, we are a non-profit. So we are one of those that Jonathan was just talking about, a non-profit community energy cooperative, and we're based in Southwest Hertfordshire. So I know I saw someone on here from, I think, Ellen, you're on from Three Rivers. We're in that kind of general direction. And John and I live in a little village called Kings Langley, just north of Watford by Hemel Hempstead. We were set up just over 10 years ago now, and the goal and the purpose of GUCE was to improve the local community resilience in the face of increasing energy costs and climate change. And when I joined GUCE about 6-7 months ago, kind of September, October time last year, and if you think about the fact that that was their plan 10-11 years ago, increasing energy costs and climate crisis are even more prevalent and even more kind of like front of mind for so many people right now, so it's even more and more important. Some of the projects that we've worked on, it was essentially GUCE was founded to start with the Rudolf Steiner School that we have here in Kings Langley, and the community got together and did a share issue where they raised about £80,000 to put 46 kilowatt system of solar panels on the Rudolf Steiner School, and that is still going strong now. It's about halfway through its 20 years and is doing a great job. think they pay about 8p a kilowatt hour for their electricity, which in today's terms would be kind of unheard of. So it's a really great case study for us. A couple of other projects. 2016, John was involved in the RCF, the Rural Community Energy Fund. They had a grant to look at the canal. We'll talk about the canal in a little bit more detail in a minute, but this one was looking, I think, using the weir and a hydroponic screw to see whether they could use that to create energy for the town. And then the most recent one, we got a grant last year from, again, the Rural Community Energy Fund. We got a £40,000 grant to do a feasibility study looking at the canal and originally looking at pulling the heat out of the canal to heat some of the homes within Kings Langley. And then we've also done transition streets, which some of you may be aware of. Transition streets came out of transition in Totnes down in Devon. And it's a project where on a street by street basis, neighbours get together and work through a handbook looking at cutting waste and looking at cutting household bills across 5 key areas. Again, I'll very briefly touch on that later on. John, have I missed anything on the GUCE side of things there? I think that covers most of it. Anything else you want to add about, John?
Yeah, no, that's great, Sarah. I just wanted to say kind of thank you to Community Energy South, who helped us put in the bid for the Rural Community Energy Fund study, and mentioned also, Michael Bevan, who's on this call, helped a lot. Right. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, so it's great to kind of be back in contact with you guys again, which is brilliant. So we'll look at what we wanted to talk about. What we were invited to talk about today was much more the recent feasibility study, which we kicked off in October. And the original application for the grant was alongside Bioregional, who are a charity of consultants to look at this. And it was originally looking at, can you pull the heat out of the canal to heat maybe a dozen? At best, we were thinking, oh, this might get like 100 homes in Kings Langley. We're not off. We're on gas here. There's not many homes, I don't believe, in Kings Langley that are on oil, so it's predominantly gas. But yeah, could we get them off fossil fuels? Could we decarbonise a little street in Kings Langley by using the canal heat? We're at a very unique point along the Grand Union Canal where the river flows through it at Toobies Mill. There's a couple of mills along the Grand Union for anyone who know it, and that means that with the flow and with the heat, it might have been possible. What we actually discovered was that the canal has in its history dried up, which may have only happened once since records began, but that obviously raises some big red flags in terms of what would be possible for heating homes. And yes, theoretically it's viable and it would heat the homes, but the temperature was kind of between, it was around the 4-degree mark, and it was too big, went between like 4 and 14, I think, the temperature of it at different times of year. And that temperature range and the fact that it had dried up just made it a little bit risky, and probably the cost versus the returns weren't going to be worth it. But what Bioregional and their other partners did with us was they mapped out all of the age of the homes. They mapped out on top of that the energy requirements of those homes, and you could see how the village had grown with new developments. So the original bit is very, very old. We're back to kind of like, I think we're Richard II or something like that. We're kind of quite a historical town, so there's a lot of listed buildings in our village, and then it's kind of grown out. And what they discovered is that on one side of the canal there's the Ovaltine factory, which has now been turned into a bunch of flats, as you'd expect. But when the Ovaltine factory was in play, they drilled about 7 or 8 boreholes, only about 15 meters down, and they accessed an aquifer, which kind of came off the canal. And they were like, if they looked at it, and if you drill down into there, if they could just access one of those, they could heat pretty much the whole of the village. So when we discovered that, we were like, okay, that's quite exciting. The canal was kind of like where we went, and we were like, this is cool. We could do a few homes, but that wasn't going to work. But actually, if you can access it now, most of these are under the Ovaltine factory. So the vast majority of them we can't access because they're people's homes or they're in their gardens. But if they can access it on one side of the canal, there's a good chance that along the other side, which falls in the Dacorum district, we would be able to access it and go through it. So what we need to do now is we're at the stage where we're getting community engagement. We're looking for responses from the community. We've done a big presentation to them back in March. We're reaching out to councillors to kind of gauge their interest and trying to get the residents to kind of say, yes, we want you to investigate further, because the first grant money's up. We've used that. The next round isn't coming from the RCEF. They've stopped that program now. So we're looking at, okay, how can we take this? Because the project would basically be, we'd have the energy centre, and there's a whole microsite. I'll put the link in the chat box afterwards, which has the full report, the summary, and all the technical appendix for anybody who wants to look at it. I'm not a techie on these kind of things. I literally started learning about heat pumps back in September last year. So there's tons of technical information on our microsite. But what it would provide is it would have this energy centre. We went up and visited Swaffham Prior and looked at how they'd done it. And then it would be a heat distribution network that would work through. So it would be able to be accessible for everybody. And like they did in Swaffham, it would be a minimal kind of cost point for people to come in. And in fact, when we did the community presentation, essentially we said, well, there are 3 options with this. And with decarbonising Kings Langley as a village as a whole, one is that we all do absolutely nothing. We all hope that there's some silver bullet around the corner that's going to fix everything and it's all going to be okay. I think given the headlines that there's a high chance of us hitting 1.5 degree warming in the next 4 years, we all know that that silver bullet isn't going to come quick enough. The other option was that this was pushed out to individual homes. And this was everybody that could afford it would pay for their own £15,000 heat pump and would pay for their own installation and do it on an individual basis. That would get some of the similar kind of results that we need in terms of decarbonising, but that wasn't fair, if you like, of a use of a word, to everybody, or going to be able to access everybody and all the different economical demographics that we have within the village or elsewhere and around. And that's really, really important, that there's energy security for everybody and there's access to everybody. This isn't just kind of like the privileged and the rich in the big houses at the top of the hill. So the community energy approach, and arguably that's why GUCE exists, is to be able to promote that community energy approach. That means that this is, yes, there's big capital expenditure from either an outside investor partnered with the council. We build interest with the community, and then each individual household has a much smaller, typically like a replacement of a gas boiler cost, to connect to the system. So yeah, so that's kind of our energy study. So we're pretty excited about it. We're probably we haven't had to deal with all the planning issues yet, but we are at the stage of discussing it with the council, which can be lead some interesting conversation. The other one I just want to touch on very, very briefly, because this was about decarbonising street by street, was the Transition Street programme, which, as I say, was set up in Totnes. And then since then it's spread around the world. And it is this amazing handbook that the team down there had set up, and you can then tailor it for your specific region. And it covers food, energy, water, resources, and travel. And it brings together neighbours, because they're in typically the same kinds of houses and have the same kinds of problems. On average, households that take part save like hundreds of pounds on their household bills. But actually, the key thing that participants say they get out of it is that sense of connection, that sense of engagement, that sense of being able to help your neighbours by giving them a tip to make their life easier, or they help you and you feel like it's kind of building that relationship. I heard on a call just before Christmas somebody saying belonging is a superpower, and actually the Surgeon General in the States has recently said that loneliness and disengagement is one of the biggest health crises they have out there at the moment, because if people aren't engaged, then they feel lonely, they switch off, they have mental health issues and everything else. But if you can bring communities together, and there's been a lot of talk about communities and community engagement on this call today, that has so many positive benefits for people, physically, mentally, and also kind of from helping them save on their energy bills and helping to decarbonize things. So that's a bit of a whirlwind. I hope that's kind of covered things. I'm sure there's a bunch of questions which happy to answer. And I just wanted to leave everybody, I'm a bit of a cheesy quote person. I love cheesy quotes. And this one by Maya Angelou is one that always sticks with me. And it's, do the best that you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. as Lisa said right at the very beginning, you can't do perfect, but you can't let that get in the way of doing what you can do. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you, Sarah. John, have you anything you would like to add?
No, it just struck me the difference between what we're looking at, which is central source of heat, and these boreholes, which go down into the aquifer, which is not far, but we're unique actually in the valley here with a great chalk aquifer underneath. And if you look at it, it goes all the way down to London. And that's a single source of heat. So it's different from the Kensa project where they're drilling boreholes, individual boreholes all the way down the street. And one of the intriguing things about Swaffham Prior, where which is a rural setting with mostly oil-fired homes, and they've got a single source of heat in the form of boreholes dotted around a field. And of course, they've dug a trench around the village, 3.5 kilometers, I think it is, with a flow return of the heat. And like, as you can see with my house, it's an old village. Many of the houses are, going to be tough to retrofit. So this heat network that's going around the village runs at quite a high temperature. Like, I think this is 72 degrees. And they have this incredible space age energy center, which was just phenomenal to go inside with pipe work all over the place and pumps, and beautifully done. So that's a radically different approach to the same kind of source of heat, was getting heat out of the ground. That's all I wanted to say, really.
And thanks, John. And just to add to that, what they also say is that when it's done on kind of like a community basis, that it can have much more efficiency. There's been talk about insulation versus non-insulated homes and heat pumps and the efficiency. And we've all, I'm sure, been in those conversations where people have gone, oh yeah, but heat pumps don't work, do they? Because they've heard somebody say that they don't. And everyone has these images of their houses freezing in the winter when it needs to be used most. But if you can reduce those peak loads or spread it across more houses and across just a bigger number of users, then that can make those heat pumps much more efficient and get more out of them.
Thank you. Thank you all. Right. Well, questions and answers. I've been jotting some notes of questions that have been asked so far, but if you have questions as well, do please do that raise your hand thing. And if it gets really quiet, you can just launch in. Kelly, you had a question for Lisa, I think. Are you okay to start with your question? Because I think it might provoke quite a discussion.
Yes, absolutely, Liz, fine. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody from Central Bedfordshire and Suffolk and everybody else I know. Lovely to see you on screen. So my question, Lisa has answered it on the chat, but I think it is a kind of a good question for the groups that I'm working with and all of everybody here. How could this be replicated in other areas in a financially viable way, Lisa?
So the problem I have at the moment is right now it's not financially viable. Not without heavy subsidy. So I had been planning to start another project, Heat the Streets 2.0, in the new year. But before I start that, I need to find ways to manage the cost that we've incurred on Heat the Streets and to work out, how much of that could be improved through different methods of procurement or reducing the scope of internal works and things like that. So yeah, right now it's not commercially viable, and that's why we received so much funding through ERDF. If it were, we wouldn't need the grant, and we'd just go out and offer this on the market now. But my job is to make that happen.
Your job is to make it commercially viable.
Well, not on my own, but yeah, that's what I do is to try to find ways to manage those costs, to finance it in different ways, to find the right areas of communities and locations where we can break through with the next project that's closer to standing on its own 2 feet, and to just keep trying to get us there. Since we started Heat the Streets, the business model for this has become commercially viable for new builds. So we're now offering that on the market now without any subsidies. So it may take some time, but each of these things is getting us closer to having an option that we can roll out across the UK.
Interesting, thank you. Kelly, I could see that with maybe with some of your groups in Central Bedfordshire.
Yeah, and there's a particular project that I'm thinking of in Suffolk as well, Lisa, so I'll drop you a line.
I'm very interested to hear about any potential sites for this. I do actually get an average of 2 per week requests to do this, and I haven't been able to take them forward yet. My most interest, my latest actually was from Kazakhstan. So I don't think I'll be trying that one next, but yeah, there's very widespread interest in it.
Thank you. Michael, you have a question.
Sorry, Liz, did you want me to answer that as well?
Oh yes, please do.
Yeah, because I think I wanted to make a point here that billions and billions of pounds are going into retrofit every year in the UK. We have social housing decarbonisation fund, we have eco, we have hugs, we have they renamed it the Great British Insulation Scheme, and then we have a vast framework or jigsaw of local bits of funding here and there, you know, available in this area, not in that area. Yeah, and for me, the ability for an entity to be able to bring those different disparate bits of funding together and deliver schemes within certain localities is a real game changer, because it gets over that kind of viability. Because at the moment, you'll see, if you talk to housing providers, they'll say, well, we went to an area and so many people were eligible for SHDF, so many people weren't, so we had to exclude those. And then of the people that were eligible, some of them dropped out, so we couldn't work with those. And then you find this great fragmentation, and the fragmentation means that fewer people benefit, but also there are fewer advantages to that scale. You know, you're not able to use that. So there is a real potential for an area-based intermediary. I think the barriers there around like the resourcing and the capacity, it's less about money and it's more about the knowledge and capacity that lies within local authorities, within local communities, and likewise. And I think for me, there's a few kind of solutions to that, and they're around like long-term engagement in this. Like basically organizations like ourselves are able to plug away at an area, be that kind of visible kind of intermediary, and build those partnerships with those different organizations and be able to solve a problem that we know that's there. I think more broadly, it's very challenging for a new community energy organization to do that every time, to build the capacity, to build the technical knowledge. And I think there is a role there for either for government, local government, or for funders to build that capacity within local areas to build those intermediaries. So I think these things are really scalable, and they can benefit from existing resources, but it's about building that capacity. That's the real key issue.
Thank you, Jonathan. Michael, does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it did or not. Michael Bevan.
Yes, I think it does, yes.
Okay, then in that case, there is a question from Gordon. I can't find it now. Gordon, are you there? Gordon with a double-barreled surname.
No, it's Gordon Mertens from Heating Bilderston in Suffolk, one of the teams that Kelly was talking about.
Oh, okay.
I was just, you know, we're in a similar stage to the third team that presented, and you know, we've got an aquifer that potentially could be a useful source for some powering of that. And what we've completely stumbled at finding the funding for the next stage of the feasibility development. You know, people are talking about HNDU as a, you know, Heat Network Development Unit, or whatever it stands for, as a possible source of the funding. And we found that, you know, that's fine, but it's only partial funding, whereas the RCEF, Rural Community Energy Fund, was 100% funding, which is obviously what volunteer groups need, because we don't have access to other funding. The local authorities are totally cash strapped because of the austerity and so on. So I was just wondering if there were any tips out there for how to fill that gap for the potentially, whatever it's 2/3, 1/3 split on HNDU funding to go to the next stage. Maybe joining up with other groups and having a group approach might not be the dumbest thing to do.
Before I hand over to my speakers to answer that, I can't help but it just occurs to me, you know, the water companies are under the cosh at the moment, and perhaps they might like to be approached and get themselves a little bit of, well, I was going to say greenwash, but a few green brownie points perhaps by funding something like this. But I'll hand over to our speakers and see if they have anything maybe a bit less off the wall to suggest.
I think we're in this same boat as you say, Gordon, as you guys over there. And my understanding is that the council has to make the HNDU application itself. So we are very much, we've just had a change of council in our local district. We've gone from blue to yellow. So we're making inroads into those connections, and there seems to be much more appetite for it with some of the incoming people. But we need to increase the education within that and try and tap into why it's so important. They've all set these targets, and we're going to be net zero by 2050, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. But they're not unless they actually put money behind it. So we're trying the borough council, as we are here, as well as the county council, and seeing, but they seem to bat each other off to each other. So yeah, great question, because I'd love to know some answers. I was hoping Community Energy South might be able to help us as well with something, whether there's an Innovate UK one or something like that, that may kind of fit this, and we can bypass the council altogether.
Yes, good point. Well, we'll keep an eye out. I'm going to hand over to Nick Banks and then over to Michael Bevan.
Oh, hi, I'm muted. Hi, everybody. I was interested to hear in Jonathan's talk that he thought that the sort of case for bulk procurement, delivering economies of scale when working in a place-based way, wasn't entirely clear. So I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts, Jonathan, and anybody else, about, you know, what actually are the economies of place, if you will. How can you drive down costs through working in a place-based way or an area-based way?
You want me to come back on that now, Liz?
Yes, do.
Yeah. I guess, Nick, my message there isn't necessarily that it isn't necessarily realised savings, but I hear this really, really regularly. I hear, if we bulk procure, we will save money. And with Carbon Co-op, we've done a number of bulk procurement exercises. We've procured solar PV panels on behalf of householders. We've procured contracting works as well. And I mean, on solar PVs, you know, the prices are so screwed down anyway that the marginal benefits are really small. You know, on contracting, contracting is so complex, yeah, and there are real trade-offs as you scale as well. If you look at some of the schemes out there, social housing decarbonisation schemes, where they're procuring 100 homes, 200 homes at once, you get different trade-offs. You know, you're trading scaled for spec, maybe, low quality, maybe, you know, we can discuss, poor engagement, maybe, you know, so there are so many different elements to this that I think a kind of knee-jerk assumption that 4 houses will be cheaper to retrofit than 1, or 10 than 1, you know, that needs to be considered. It's complex. It's a complex issue to do so. Now, having said all that, and I would also say that construction is like one element of the cost of a retrofit, and materials and labor form that as well. So you look at a whole value of a retrofit, and then some of that is contracting, and then some of that is materials. And for example, a scheme we did, we were able to procure wood fiber insulation from Germany in bulk, bring it over and do that cheaper, because we're doing 16 houses than 1 would be able to on its own. So you can squeeze elements of it, but the overall saving may be, you know, 5% or 2%, or, you know, so it is complex. Having said all that, an area-based scheme whereby a contractor can set up a site office in a single area. And interestingly, our contractor is looking for to limit travel to work for those contractors. So they're within a 3-mile radius, limiting carbon emissions in other ways. And like sites and all sorts of things, it can bring down costs as well. But I think the thing around an areas-based scheme is the real benefit, like the quantifiable benefit, is around other things like community engagement, training, social value, equity, fairness, and a greater take-up as well, because you're being less discriminatory about who can qualify and not. So yeah, the message is like, not necessarily, there aren't cost savings, but we need to be careful about those assumptions, I think.
Can anyone else comment on the bulk buying, bulk purchasing? Anyone else have observations to make? If not, I'll hand it. Oh, Lisa, go on.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Jonathan said there. I mean, you're not guaranteed to make savings buying in bulk, and in fact, sometimes it's slightly more complex, because you need site managers and project managers all of a sudden to do all of the work all at one time. What it does do is make it easier for the people that are living in the houses that you're working on, because they're doing less of the project management themselves. So, it's something to balance out there, but it doesn't guarantee savings buying in bulk at the moment. Perhaps when we're at bigger scale, maybe.
Thank you. Michael, you had some observations, I imagine, around funding.
Yes, it's just picking up back on the comments around the HNDU funding and requiring the 1/3 match, basically. So again, obviously, council is the council is the obvious source for funding, but again, potentially there is that you could be using leverage with by effectively running a pioneer share scheme to fund. Say, if you're looking at a £60,000 project, and you've got 20,000 and the £20,000 match, you say, okay, to the council, will you put in 10? We'll put in 10 from our community, and you basically sell that a pioneer share scheme as a way of actually getting a project started, and potentially that could be done something where you could actually then market it, give them people seed enterprise investment scheme tax relief, which is 50%. It's a bit complex. It's a lot of work for a small amount of money, but again, what it would also do is shows demonstration of community engagement, and it can raise it then being a sort of a precursor to a much larger share offer. Basically, Reading Hydro used a pioneer share offer to get at this to get past the planning stages and things like that, and they enabled a £1.15 million project. So it can be used in small at certain points just to get something going, and people, and it's a possible way of doing it. There's more information about UK on the Co-ops UK about pioneer share offers.
Thank you, Michael. Does that mean that it's got to be people who are quite happy to take a bigger risk?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at, I don't know, again, if you are looking at, say, £20,000 and you've got 20 people who are investing £1,000 plus a project that might decarbonize the whole of a town, it's not necessarily a big risk.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really interesting proposal. Oh, I can hear other people in the office around me making interested, appreciative noises. So yeah, look on the Co-ops UK website to find out more. Okay. Are there any more questions? Because if not, it looks like we may end early. Well, there must be more questions. Did anybody, I wanted to know a bit more about, the heat pump, the Kensa project, and what could be done to bring costs down. That's my curiosity. So if nobody else has any questions, I'm really interested to see where Lisa thinks things might go to bring costs down. And actually, if there's anything that we in the community energy sector could be doing to precipitate that, or to support some way of costs coming down. I don't know what they would be, but if you have any ideas, Lisa.
So one of the things that I want to investigate now is how much of the work internally that we did in people's homes, replacing radiators, putting in new hot water cylinders, how much of that is essential and how much of that is to make the heat delivery system perfect. Because I think that there may be some cost savings available there if we come back to that point of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, because the labor costs associated with replacing a whole heating system are incredibly high, and it's it's quite a big barrier to rolling this out across the UK. So I'm going to be doing a bit of research to try and work out what's essential, what's nice to have. We're working with somebody who's designing a new drill rig that would be a lot cheaper than the rigs that are commercially available on the market now. So he believes that he can build a rig that costs somewhere between £30,000 and £60,000, which is a fraction of the sort of £250,000 that these rigs actually cost. So that's, very expensive equipment to have on site. It's expensive to mobilize. And if the equipment is cheaper, then the cost of installation would be cheaper. Another thing that we're doing is part funded by Innovate UK on Heat Pump Ready Stream 2, where kensa heat pumps are creating a heat pump with built-in energy storage. So this is the first time that there has been a significant change to the refrigeration circuit since about 1890, in place of the condenser. We've got phase change material at 2 different temperatures, and that means that we're capturing waste heat. You get hot water as a byproduct of space heating, and we're able to store 12 kilowatt hours of heat energy, which you could generate overnight when electricity is cheaper. And that 12 kilowatt hours equates to up to about 3 hours of space heating in your house. So you could avoid the afternoon peak in energy costs. And that would be a really valuable way of helping to manage the impact on the grid of electrification of heat and to bring down people's ownership costs of these systems. It's not loads more efficient than a typical heat pump, but it is more efficient than our traditional builds. It's quite complex because it doesn't behave in the same way as a normal heat pump that needs very complex controls. It can't be tested in the same way as a heat pump. So right now we can't sell it as one because the electrical consumption is not at the same time as the heat output. They're divorced from each other because of the storage. So it makes it really hard to measure the exact efficiency of the system. We're also creating the kensa new box, which is a more efficient version of our shoebox heat pump. So it's a heat pump that would fit in an airing cupboard. It's as efficient as our Evo heat pump, which was designed for large self-built houses. It's about the size of a fridge. This one's a bit more practical for most homeowners. It would fit in a typical house in the UK. So we are doing quite a lot of development work to bring down all of these costs. The other thing that we're looking at is how we procure and manage services, and whether we can get cost savings on on labor, on subcontractors, whether we're going to bring in direct labor to manage those costs instead of using subcontractors. So everything that we do actually day to day is to try and manage the capital cost, the cost of finance, and the running cost of systems to make it easier for people to take them up.
Thank you. There's a question from Vanessa and also a question from Phil. Phil, do you want to go first and then Vanessa?
Okay, just going back to the problem of the radiators. When we've looked at retrofitting heat pumps and so on in Tollsbury, we haven't got a great track record with this. We haven't got a lot of homes that we can talk about, but of the few that we can, we have been told that in fact you very rarely have to change many radiators, and certainly not all of them. And the reason for this, I understand it, is that years ago when plumbers put in central heating systems, the last thing they wanted was the client coming back a few days later and saying, I'm still freezing. So they generally, because radiators were cheap, they would oversize the radiators and consequently, apparently the vast majority seem to be okay for air source and ground source heat pumps from our limited knowledge so far.
Yeah, and that it should be the case that most are okay, because most radiators should be designed, you know, your heat delivery system should be designed to cope with usually a condensing gas boiler running at 55 degree flow, so it should be fine. But the reality of what we see at the moment is that in most places you have to change quite a lot of the pipework and many of the radiators.
Jonathan, have you anything to add on that, given the work that you're doing?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So we do a lot of we do whole house assessments, and we look at reducing the demand so that the heat pumps that go in there can be appropriately sized to be as small as possible and run as efficiently as possible. That's our kind of focus. In terms of the radiators themselves, I'd really advocate looking at Super Homes Ireland, Tipperary Energy Agency have done fantastic work looking at large scale, at scale installs of heat pumps. What they found, and they did a lot of work on the radiators, what they found was in a lot of cases, the existing radiators were good enough for the lower heat temperatures, good enough emitters of heat for those. That the success points tended to be newer radiators were better. There was no need for kind of like oversized necessarily, and no need for underfloor either. And yeah, in the experience that we've been doing, what tends to happen is we might replace one or two radiators depending on the condition of them when we inspect them, depending on the size and the location and the demand for heat going forward. So it is a little bit of a complex answer, but in many cases the swap out for radiators doesn't need to happen.
So it's a slight issue here because I'm working in a company of engineers. They want it to be perfect, and I want the business model to work, which is not the same thing.
Totally, and I know engineers well.
Vanessa, do you want to add anything to this, or bring in your observation?
Oh, I will observe on my question. I was chatting to the CTO of the Energy Systems Catapult, and he said that they'd done some work recently looking at the efficiency of high temperature heat pumps, and that actually they'd found that in most cases there wasn't much of an efficiency hit because you don't have to run them at high temperature very often, and running at low temperatures you get the higher efficiency. Have you looked at that and whether that's a solution to expensive retrofit?
So again, until now, Kensa's market has been new build and social housing retrofit, and the products that we have available now are suitable for that, and they work for that. Again, I work for a company of engineers, and they want it to be as good as it possibly can be. So if you run a heat pump with a 65 degree flow, you do get some hit on efficiency. I calculated that I would expect it to cost a typical householder about £200 more a year to go from a 50 degree flow to a 65 degree flow. Now, to me, I'd pay that instead of swapping out all of my radiators. I think that's reasonable. The difficulty is that our current heat pumps, they can do 65 degrees for domestic hot water, but they're not built to do that for a long term. So we would still have to design a different heat pump to deliver that. It would be a different product that was built to run at that temperature for longer periods of time. You'd also have to buy a bigger heat pump because your heat output would be reduced, so that the kilowatt output of the heat pump would be reduced by the fact that it's working harder. So we don't have a product right now that would offer that. But I'm getting people to have a think about whether we should have one for the private retrofit market. And I had in my presentation there, I think that it should be fabric next if we're talking about net zero. sorry, Jonathan. If we're talking about, if the question is net zero, then I think it's fabric next. The first single most important thing you can do is change your heat source. And I'm now starting to wonder, is it also, do your radiators next? You know, efficiency next. So go for a higher temperature heat pump, accept the heat delivery system that you've got, and then improve that over time when you've got the luxury to do so.
That's a very interesting. Go on, Jonathan. Yeah.
What do DNOs say to you when you say heat pump first? Because they look really scared when we talk to them about their projections for electricity use on the network with heat pumps without any insulation.
That's kind of, it's their job to do that. The government's told us to scale up to 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028. They need to make sure that the grid's able to cope with that. We do have to electrify heat in the UK. We can't keep burning gas in houses. So there should be some kind of plan for that. Every single one of Kensa's heat pumps is connect and notify. So whilst for a larger project, we do approach the DNO and warn them that this is coming online, actually we can still do that, and then they will upgrade the grid afterwards if there's a need to do so. So it's not a blocker for us rolling this out street by street.
I just think if you look at energy projections, not just per DNO, but across the UK, look at the CCC projections, that it's a wider energy system challenge. It's like we all have to pay for reinforcement of the grid. We all have to pay for new generation in the North Sea and elsewhere. And that's a whole system kind of challenge. So I understand when you put a heat pump in, and I'm totally electrification, like I'm all in on that, you know, but if you look at those projections, then as a society, we have a challenge if we do not introduce demand reduction as part of that electrification.
And that's where things like built-in energy storage, you know, the heat storage are really going to manage that, because the problem is not using electricity to heat your house. The problem is the peak on the coldest day of the coldest year. That's the bit of electrical consumption that's going to be a problem for the UK, and that's the bit that you've got to plan ahead for. So all of these different things that we can do to manage that, and ground source is particularly good for that, because you can do things like incorporate waste heat on a system, which will improve the efficiency, and that reduces the electrical consumption. There are loads of ways around managing that, and yeah, we've got to get on and do it.
I think I can see a webinar coming up about upgrading the grid and how should it be paid for. And I think that would actually be really useful for people, because lots of people don't really, you know, the network operators have never had to engage with the public, and most people in community energy are the public. So it would actually be a valuable conversation, because yeah, I have some questions about how it should be paid for. I kind of like Kensa's approach that, hey, we'll just provide the technology and the network can sort themselves out. I quite like that.
Anyway, ask forgiveness, not permission.
Yes. Anyway, we could go down that debate about developers and things, but let's not. We've come to 11:27, so I would just, which is amazing. We're going to finish early, and lots of people have had to leave already. So I would like to say a really big thank you to our speakers. I think it's been really informative, and I do hope that those of you who come can do something useful with what you've learned. I'm not sure what yet. And I'm hoping that Carbon Co-op will have some lovely, I can't think what the phrase is now, toolkit is a popular phrase, but you know, templates that we can all, that lots of these groups can take off and do something with. And yeah, and good luck to Grand Union and other people doing water source. And Lisa, let's watch your space. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.